The morning sun over the frontier looked almost peaceful, but the scene beneath it felt anything but. Dust swirled around the crowded auction yard, boots scraping, horses stomping, men muttering impatiently as the auctioneer's raspy voice tried to control the chaos. Most people had come for cattle, tools, wagons, the usual trade of a town that lived on survival. The farmer, 26 years old, broad-shouldered from years of hard work, and carrying a loneliness he rarely showed, stood near the back with a list of supplies in his pocket. He wasn't here for anything, or anyone, that would change his life. He had learned long ago not to expect surprises. The world had taken his family, his warm home, his easy laughter. All he had left was land, routine, and silence. But then the crowd shifted. Voices quieted. A single figure stepped into the dusty ring. An Apache woman, maybe 22, maybe a year younger or older, stood with her wrists loosely tied by a frayed rope. Her hair hung in long braids, dust at the ends, but her back was straight, her chin lifted with a kind of tired pride. Her expression wasn't broken or pleading like the auctioneer expected. Instead, she carried the look of someone who had lost too much to be frightened anymore. The farmer didn't mean to stare, but something about her rooted his boots to the ground. The auctioneer barked harshly about her being the last one left behind after the village scattered. The words made the farmer's jaw tighten. He didn't know her story, but he knew enough about grief to recognize it in her eyes. She wasn't dangerous. She stood there, listening to every word without flinching, though her fingers trembled just slightly, so slightly that only someone watching closely would see. He noticed. The auctioneer tried again. Going once, going twice, the farmer felt a pull in his chest, a soft, instinctive urge he didn't understand. He'd spent years speaking only to animals, to empty fields, to the memory of those he had lost. Yet here was someone whose silence somehow matched his own. He didn't think. He didn't plan. His hands simply rose. The crowd twisted around to look. A few muttered. Some laughed. But the Apache woman's eyes lifted, and landed on him. For a moment, the noise faded. The dust, the heat, the chatter, it all blurred out as they stared at each other. Not as buyer and property. Not as enemies from two worlds. Sold. And just like that, the farmer realized he hadn't bought a worker. He had taken responsibility for someone who had nothing left. And she, for the first time in what felt like forever, saw a pair of eyes that did not look at her with disgust or fear, but with something unfamiliar, something warm. The wagon creaked as it rolled away from the auction yard, leaving behind the noise of bargaining voices and echoing footsteps. The path ahead stretched long and empty, a winding trail of pale dust and scattered sagebrush leading toward the farmer's isolated homestead. He sat on the wooden seat, reins in his hands, but his attention flicked, again and again, to the quiet figure sitting at the back of the wagon. The Apache woman didn't speak. She didn't ask why he bought her, didn't beg him to turn around, didn't curse or cry. She sat straight despite the exhaustion evident in her posture, her ankles crossed, her hands resting lightly in her lap as she gazed at the horizon. The way she held herself, guarded yet dignified, pulled at something deep inside him. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of mesquite and dry grass. Her hair lifted with it, strands brushing across her cheek. She didn't brush them away. Instead, her brown eyes traced the landscape with the quiet intensity of someone searching for memories, landmarks, something familiar that had been taken away. He cleared his throat, careful not to startle her. "You can drink from the canteen if you're thirsty." His voice came out softer than he intended, rough around the edges from underuse. Her gaze shifted toward him, slow, cautious. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she reached for the canteen, lifting it with both hands. She drank only a little, as if conserving even the small kindness offered. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed, barely a whisper of contact, but the warmth of it lingered, surprising them both. She looked away quickly, her breath tightening, and he felt his own heartbeat stutter with an unexpected awareness. He tried again, his tone gentle. I'm not. I didn't buy you for anything bad. You'll see. She didn't answer in words, but her shoulders eased just slightly. Not trust. But maybe, less fear. For a while, silence settled between them. A softer silence. The kind that didn't sting. The sun began to sink lower, washing the sky in gold. The wagon wheels groaned over rocks and dry earth. Occasionally he stole a glance at her through the corner of his eye. He noticed small things, a tiny scar on her temple, the way her nails were chipped and uneven, the faint shaking in her hand she tried to hide. She must have been terrified. Yet she faced the open land as if daring it to break her again. When the air turned colder around dusk, he hesitated before shrugging off his coat. Here, he murmured. It's colder on the back of the wagon. She blinked in surprise. For a moment, pride flickered in her expression, she wasn't used to being shown care. But when the wind sent a shiver through her, she finally accepted the coat, pulling it gently around her shoulders. That was their first fragile truce. As the homestead finally appeared, a lone cabin framed by tired fences and fading light, he felt something shift inside him. He had lived in silence for years. Now, sitting beside him, wrapped in his coat, was someone whose silence didn't feel like emptiness, but like possibility. Two lonely souls, sharing a wagon ride neither of them expected. And though neither said it aloud, their lives had already begun to intertwine. The farm greeted them with a quiet that felt almost sacred. No neighbors for miles, no passing riders, nothing but the whisper of wheat brushing against the wind. His cabin, small, sturdy, shaped by years of solitude, stood at the center of it all like a relic untouched by time. He climbed down from the wagon first, then stepped back to offer her his hand. A simple gesture. But her eyes flicked to it with uncertainty, as if she wasn't sure whether it was kindness or another command. She hesitated. He didn't push. When she finally took his hand, her touch was light, almost weightless, but he felt it all the way up his arm. She stepped down carefully, her bare feet landing softly on the dirt-packed ground, her posture guarded but unbroken. Inside the cabin, he moved slowly, speaking gently, giving her room to breathe. This room is yours, he said, opening the door to the small guest room. It had a simple bed, a wooden table, a folded blanket. He had used it for storage before, but now he cleared the path, making sure she could see everything was safe. She looked around with alert eyes, taking in every detail, the window, the door, the shadows, the corners, as if memorizing a possible escape route. She'd learned to survive by never trusting too quickly. He stepped back, untied the rope from her wrists, and set it on the table. You won't need that, he told her gently. Her hands fell to her sides slowly, as if rediscovering what freedom felt like. She rubbed her wrists where the rope had been. Not in pain, just in disbelief. He offered her space, stepping out of the doorway. You can rest. Or, if you want, I can show you around the farm later. She nodded once. Not a yes, not a no. Just acknowledgement. For hours that afternoon, the two of them moved around each other like two worlds learning their orbit. She wandered through the house quietly, never touching anything without permission. She stepped outside often, letting the open air calm the tension in her shoulders. He caught glimpses of her shading her eyes to study the fields, as if mapping the land around her. At one point, she watched him repair a fence from a distance. His movements, slow, steady, thoughtful, seemed to reassure her. There was no harshness in him, no unpredictable force. Later, when she tentatively stepped into the kitchen, he handed her a small piece of cornbread. She accepted it with both hands, a gesture of respect from her culture. He noticed the way she ate, carefully, quietly, savoring each bite as if unused to steady meals. They shared no long conversations. Yet the silence between them had shifted. It wasn't the uncomfortable quiet from the auction yard or the wary quiet from the wagon. This was something softer. By nightfall, she surprised him by sweeping the porch on her own. Not because she was told to, but because she wanted to contribute, to show she wasn't helpless. When he stepped outside and their eyes met, she offered him the smallest, rawest hint of a smile, uncertain, almost shy, but real. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to feel safe. And for the farmer, who had lived in silence for years, that tiny smile filled the whole empty farm with new warmth. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the sky was painted in soft evening colors, and the next it darkened to a brooding blue, clouds swallowing the sun as wind swept across the open fields. The first crack of thunder struck so suddenly that even the horses jumped. Inside the cabin, the Apache woman stood near the window, her silhouette framed by the flickering lantern light. When the thunder shook the ground again, she flinched, barely, but noticeably. Her breath hitched in her chest, and her hands curled into fists. He saw it. He had been chopping vegetables at the kitchen table, trying to give her space, but the moment her shoulders tensed, his knife stilled in midair. He could almost feel the memory haunting her, something she wasn't saying, something buried deep. Another boom. This one longer, angrier. She backed away from the window, her eyes focusing on nothing and everything at once. The strong, quiet dignity she always carried slipped for just a moment, revealing something fragile underneath. He approached slowly, cautious like someone walking toward a wild animal that had been caged too long. "You all right?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. Her chest rose sharply. Her breath came uneven. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at whatever the storm reminded her of, running, hiding, losing everything. So he didn't ask again. Instead, he sat beside her on the long wooden bench, deliberately leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel cornered. For a moment, she didn't move. But the storm roared again, and this time her entire body tensed. He spoke gently, his voice low and steady. "I'm right here. No one's coming." The words were simple, but they reached her. She exhaled shakily, her shoulders dropping just a little. Then, slowly, she slid down the bench, closer, but still cautious, leaning her back against the wall. Not touching him yet, but seeking his presence. He kept his hands in his lap, not wanting to overwhelm her, though every instinct in him wanted to offer comfort. His own heart beat a little faster, unfamiliar, protective, tender. Minutes passed like that. The storm's fury crashed outside, but inside the cabin was a different world, the flicker of lantern light, the soft rhythm of their breaths, the steady warmth building between two people who had lived too long without gentleness. When lightning split the sky, she startled again, and this time her arm brushed his. A tiny, accidental touch. But it sent a warm jolt through both of them. Her eyes flicked to him, just for a second, filled with vulnerability and the very beginning of trust. He offered her a quiet smile. Not a big one, not confident, just a small, reassuring curve of the lips. She inhaled deeply, and he heard her whisper, barely audible, "Thunder, reminds me." Her voice cracked a little. Not with fear, but with memory. He nodded, letting her speak only if she wanted to. He shared his own truth. "I remember storms too. Lost my family in one, long time ago." Her eyes softened immediately, empathy replacing the fear. In that moment, their pain touched, different stories, same ache. The storm eventually passed. But neither of them moved from the bench. Something had shifted tonight. Not loud, not dramatic. Something gentle, trembling, new. For the first time since she arrived, she wasn't just surviving in his home. She was beginning to connect. Beginning to trust. And he, without meaning to, was beginning to feel again. The days after the storm felt lighter, as if the sky itself had softened. The Apache woman moved around the farm with a new steadiness in her steps. She still kept her guard up, but something had changed. She looked at him now, not just past him. When he spoke, she listened with her eyes as much as her ears. When he handed her tools for chores, her fingers brushed his briefly, not by accident, but with a quiet, testing courage. He noticed every small shift. Every glance. Every moment she allowed herself to breathe near him. But harmony in the West rarely lasted long. It began with hoofbeats echoing across the open fields, 3 riders approaching from the direction of town. He was out near the barn, repairing a broken gate. She was in the garden, kneeling as she tended the struggling squash plants. The instant she heard the riders, her shoulders stiffened. He looked up. She froze. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't shift, just widened in silent dread. Before he could say anything, she whispered one word under her breath, trembling slightly, "Men." He straightened, dusted off his hands, and walked toward the riders. The air felt different, charged, the peaceful farm suddenly watching and listening. The 3 men pulled their horses to a stop near the house, their expressions hard, self-assured. He recognized them vaguely from the town, men who always hung around the saloon, men who carried bitterness like a second skin. "You bought her at the auction," the lead rider said without greeting. "We're here to take her off your hands." He felt his jaw clench. "I didn't say I wanted to be rid of her." The man smirked, leaning on his saddle horn. "She's Apache. You can't keep her here like some neighbor. She belongs under proper control." Something hot surged in the farmer's chest at those words. A kind of anger he rarely felt, but it came roaring now, fueled by every moment he'd watched her try to rebuild herself. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said, voice low and steady. The second rider spat into the dirt. "You think you can protect her? Once the others hear she's here, they'll come too. You should hand her over now and save yourself trouble." Behind him, he heard a soft step, the woman standing in the doorway. Her breathing was fast, sharp. Even from a distance he could see her trembling, not in fear of punishment, but in fear of being torn from the first place that had felt remotely safe since her world shattered. He stepped closer to the riders, blocking their view of her. "You're not taking her," he said. "Not today. Not ever." The lead rider's expression darkened. "You'll regret this." They turned their horses and rode off, dust swirling in angry spirals behind them. Only when the hoofbeats faded did he slowly turn around. She stood there, gripping the doorframe, her eyes shining, not with tears, but with something rawer, something deeper. A mix of disbelief and gratitude. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, softly, in her unsteady English, "You choose me." Again. He swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. "I didn't choose trouble," he said gently. "I chose you." She stepped closer, one small, hesitant step. Not touching him yet. But standing nearer than she ever had before. In that fragile distance between them, something powerful was born, a bond no threat could break. A trust earned, not forced. A connection starting to bloom in the middle of a harsh world. And for both of them, everything felt different now. The encounter with the riders left a quiet echo across the farm, an echo she felt more deeply than she showed. For days after, the Apache woman stayed close to the house. She still worked, still moved with the same disciplined grace, but now she watched the horizon more carefully. Every distant hoofbeat made her head turn. Every shift in the wind made her pause. But when her eyes met the farmer's, something new always softened within her. A small trust. A steady warmth. A growing sense that she wasn't alone anymore. The farmer noticed the way she hovered near the doorway when he worked outside, as if her presence could help him somehow. He didn't tease her or ask questions. He simply worked with a quiet pride, knowing she felt safer with him near. One calm evening, the two of them found themselves on the porch together. The sun had just set, leaving streaks of orange and fading purple across the sky. The wooden boards beneath them were warm from the day's heat, and the crickets had begun their nightly chorus. She sat cross-legged, braiding her long dark hair with patient, practiced hands. He sat a few feet away, cleaning an old lantern. He tried not to stare, but he kept finding himself watching the way her fingers moved, the way her expression softened when the breeze brushed her cheek. After a while, she spoke first, surprising both of them. "You fix everything," she said quietly, her English careful. He glanced at her, smiling a little. "Only the things I know how to fix." She looked at him for a long moment, something thoughtful in her gaze. "You fix, me too," she whispered. Inside. The lantern nearly slipped from his hands. She turned away, suddenly shy. But the confession lingered in the warm air between them, filling the space with a tenderness neither of them knew how to name yet. To steady himself, he asked gently, "Can you show me how to make those braids? Maybe I could learn." She blinked, surprised again. Then a small, hesitant smile tugged at the corner of her lips, one of the rare smiles she gave only when her heart relaxed. "You. No good with hair," she teased softly, her voice light in a way he'd never heard before. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Probably true." For the first time since she arrived, she laughed, an actual laugh, quiet and warm, catching both of them off guard. It was soft, yet full of innocence he hadn't expected. Then, from a small pouch she kept with her things, she pulled out thin strands of colored thread, earthy reds, muted blues, soft browns. She braided them together quickly, her fingers moving with swift, confident precision. A bracelet. She held it for a moment, studying it with a seriousness that felt ceremonial. Then she turned to him and extended it gently. "For you," she said. "Protection." He blinked, his heart tugging painfully at the sincerity in her voice. When she tied the bracelet around his wrist, her fingers lingered, warm, careful, deliberate. A small spark passed between them, so subtle they both felt it but neither spoke of it. When her hand finally fell away, he couldn't help staring at the bracelet. "You made this, for me?" She nodded, her cheeks warming. "You keep me safe. Now I keep you." The words were simple. But they carried a depth of meaning no gift had ever held for him. As the evening darkened and the lantern glowed softly between them, they stayed on the porch, closer than before, comfortable in one another's presence. Not touching. Not rushing. Just existing together in a way that felt natural, and quietly intimate. Their bond, once fragile, now felt like something real, something neither of them were afraid to reach for. And in that tender quiet of a fading day, their slow-burn connection finally began to bloom. Winter had settled deep into the valley by the time the farmer realized just how much his life had changed. Snow hugged the fence posts, frost clung to the windows, and the wind carried a loneliness that used to shake him to his bones. But this year, that loneliness never quite reached his heart, not since the young Apache woman had come into his world. Even so, the time for truth had arrived. The soldier had returned. Not the cruel one, not the man who once barked orders and treated her like property. This was a younger officer, polite but firm, carrying a leather folder tucked beneath his arm and a government seal pressed into the front. He rode up the farmer's path with caution, as though expecting a gun to greet him. When he dismounted, his boots sank into the snow with a muted crunch. "I'm here on official matter," the soldier said, breath visible in the cold. "We've received notice that an Apache woman was purchased during the relocation sweep months ago. Legally, her status must be clarified." The farmer felt the ground tilt under him. The woman had been inside the barn sorting winter feed, unaware of the visitor. His heart thudded painfully. He had known, deep down, that the world would eventually come knocking, but he wasn't ready. Not for this. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," said the soldier, "she cannot be kept as property. She must choose, to return to the reservation, or declare her place here of her own free will." The farmer swallowed hard. "And if she chooses neither?" "Then she is taken into federal custody," the soldier answered. We cannot leave her without legal status. Everything inside the farmer rebelled at the idea of her being taken away. He had seen the reservation wagons. He had seen the despair. He had seen how the world treated people like her, with fear, prejudice, and cold indifference. She would not survive there. Not alone. Not after everything she had suffered. When the woman finally approached, her steps slow and unsure, the soldier explained her options in gentle, simple words. She listened silently, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at the farmer. Not with fear. Not with confusion. But with calm certainty. He hadn't realized how tightly he was holding his breath until her hand, small, warm, steady, lifted to rest against his chest. Her fingers curled lightly into his coat, right over his heartbeat. "I stay," she said softly. 2 simple words. Yet they hit him with the force of a storm. The soldier nodded, relief softening his face. "Then it will be written as choice. No one has a claim over you anymore." The farmer felt something within him loosen, something that had been wound tight for years, guilt, grief, fear, all melting under the truth of her decision. She had chosen not safety. Not obligation. Not escape. She had chosen him. She had chosen home. And in that moment, the lonely farmer realized something he had never expected: he had been saved just as much as he had saved her.